Welcome to the SBK betting podcast, and we are midway through December and Christmas is just 10 days away now. And unless you're listening in some faraway exotic country, which sounds like a great idea at the moment, you'll be experiencing the big almighty freeze, which has engulfed the country over here and in Ireland. Scrooge has arrived in the form of a frost, and for the second Saturday running, we have no National Hunt racing. The Ascot Long Walk Hurdle card has been cancelled, although we hear it will be rescheduled for Boxing Day at Kempton, which is good news. Haydock is cancelled. So, as I said, no National Hunt racing until at least Monday. So, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you will see the delight on one man's face as this freeze has actually conjured up a very early Christmas present for one delighted podcast regular. Christmas has come early for you, Tom Collins, as we present an all-weather special.
You love to see it, Jess, don't you? I wait all year for this. This time of year, I'm thinking, God, we've got to look at jumps again. And look, I like jumps racing, don't get me wrong. Not as much as you two, but I do like jumps racing. But when it's just all weather, God, I feel like I'm in my element right now.
Yeah, look, I'm expecting you to go through the cards, so no excuses, as you've got absolutely no distractions. But also, must say, you're actually on quite a good trajectory with the jumps before we petered out for this enforced break. So you'll have to pick it up where you left off when we do finally get back to it. Ross, I can see you're delighted as well. We know how much you love the flat action, especially the all-weather. What do you make of the cards that we've got to look forward to this weekend?
It's quite something when you look through an entire card and don't recognise a single name, which was the case with Chelmsford. Lingfield a little bit differently. There was a few names cropping up that had come across my vision before, but yeah, Chelmsford was an interesting experience.
Yeah, Chelmsford is one of the lesser meetings, which I will be presenting at myself, and we are looking forward to getting stuck in it. And actually, no holds aside, I think we are relieved to see that Lingfield hosting the 7-race card, including a genuine quality listed race in the Quebec Stakes. And also, I do think the race preceding that as well, the Winter Oaks trial, is a pretty good contest. Some really good fillies lining up in lots of excellent form as well. But it is the Quebec Stakes that we're going to look at as our main race for this weekend. As I said, listed contest, 1 mile, 2 furlongs. We've got 6 runners. Now, the roll of honour for this race is pretty good. Dubai Warriors actually won this race twice. He won it last year, won it in 2019, Sangarius in 2020. And we've seen some really good all-weather performers who've gone off to Meydan and the likes in the new year. And this is a race where we've got Algiers returning to the scene of where he was second and just collared on the line by Mr. Cut in the Churchill Stakes last time, where he ran a blinder out in front, nearly stole it from the front. Can he do it again with potentially the same tactics? That will be the question. He's the likely market leader. You've got Forest of Dean in there as well, Harrovian for John and Thady Gosden, and also Making Me Do It for Harry Eustace and Hayley Turner, the lead protagonist. But as I say, 6 runners. TC, as I mentioned, a lot of the form centres around the Churchill Stakes. They're lining up again. Do you think Algiers can perform in the way that he did last time, which was quite an inspired ride by Rab Havlin that day? Jack Mitchell's on this time.
Yeah, I do. Before I get stuck into the Algiers' form and the reason why I think he'll win this race, 2 other horses in here that you've touched on, Harrovian and Forest of Dean, they're your all-weather stalwarts. They kind of always run in these races. You like to see them in there because they're both 6 now. John and Thady Gosden are represented twice. They've won this race back in 2018 and 2019, obviously just under John Gosden's name then. I think they're going to run very good races, and it would be good if they're there or thereabouts, because you don't see too many 6-year-olds on the flat, especially running to this kind of level. But again, I think they are beatable to a young and improving type. Making Me Do It is perhaps that one. I mean, she's a 3-year-old filly. She runs in this race for Harry Eustace. She was really impressive last time in a handicap, a 0 to 105. Scooted around the inside rail. You generally don't want to be there at Lingfield, or Wolverhampton actually, at any point, because the surface tends to ride deeper, especially in the cold weather. You want to be towards the middle of the track and towards the pace, and she came from basically last. But she scooted around the inside. She won really impressively. The only thing that I don't think is in her favour is that no filly has ever won this race. one 5-year-old mare won it called Don't Be back in 2015. And only 2 3-year-olds have won this race as well out of 14 editions. So the trends are against making me do it, which leaves me with Algiers. Last time out, I thought he ran an absolute screamer in the Churchill Stakes, as you just touched on. They went hammer and tongs from the outset. Majestic Dawn went out in front, was far too keen, and just bolted basically in the early stages. 2 horses tried to go with him. Algiers raced in second, and back in third was Top Anticipation. Now, in the closing stages, Majestic Dawn fell out the back of the TV, eventually finished last, just went too hard early on. Top Anticipation, who was third early, finished 7th, again faded out the back of the TV in the closing stages. Algiers kicked off the home bend and looked like he was going to record a really impressive success, only to be run down by Mr. Cut, trained by George Bowie, obviously won at Royal Ascot and was returning from a break, a very good horse. Algiers beat Harrovian by almost 4 lengths that day, but I think with a more efficient ride, that margin would have been even bigger. I thought the ride was good, but I don't think it was amazing given the tank was virtually empty with a furlong to run, yet he still continued to gallop. This horse has only had 3 starts in Britain. He'd previously raced over in the UAE, he previously raced in France, and he showed a good level of form. I think he's got so much upside, and from draw 1, with Jack Mitchell on board, and he's the only pace horse in this race, surely Algiers wins the Listed Quebec Stakes.
Yeah, you create a brilliant case. You can't really... There's so many things going for him. Added to that, Simon and Crisford's run of form at the moment is breathtaking. I feel like I've been saying this quite a lot throughout the course of the turf season, but they do so well on this surface. Potentially it's because they know how to harness the best out of these horses. They bring a lot of them to Dubai, don't they? Would you imagine to see this horse might end up back over there in the new year?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I think he's a previous winner at Jebel Ali, going back through his form earlier on today. And to win at Jebel Ali, you need stamina and speed because it's a track that's really unforgiving, uphill finish, and you kind of need everything to win there if you're running to a certain level, of course. If you're running to a lower level, you don't. So I wouldn't be surprised if they sent him over there in the new year. But this is a good starting point for Simon and Crisford. Obviously, last time out, he showed that promise that he'd previously shown in previous years. I think if he can build on that, win this race, get sent over to Saudi or the UAE, then he can come back next year in the summer and, perform to a very good level on the weather.
Okay, a really good case for Algiers, who is the likely favourite, but it sounds like, and he seems to be a deserved favourite as well, based on that very good run. Mr. Cut is a serious horse, and doing what he did under that uninspired ride, got to say he's got to be right up there. Rab Havlin is clearly having to back on a John and Thady Gosden horse in the shape of Forest of Dean. William Buick's on Harrovian. This is the horse, Ross, that, as Tom touched upon, ran a good race in behind Algiers. Entitled just have needed it. He's been off the track a good bit. He's a funny one, isn't he? Because he's a sort of a nearly horse. I feel like he's always promised a lot, and he has delivered, but sort of always at this level.
Yeah, he's never quite gone on, has he? I mean, that was his first run for 134 days. So I think you're right. I think he is entitled to come forward a little bit, possibly in terms of fitness, but also in terms of race sharpness. And I appreciate that Algiers probably went hard and with a more efficient ride probably has an upside himself. But actually, the way the race panned out, Harrovian was probably a bit further back than he wanted to be. As the race quickened into the straight, he had to switch out to his right. He sort of got caught on the leader who was falling back through the field, had to switch right, get reorganised. And I think the first 2 had sort of gone by then. I think if that hadn't happened, he'd have got rolling a bit sooner. I don't think he'd have been beaten as far. For all that I can fully appreciate what TC is saying, that Algiers is the one to beat, he might well offer a little bit of value in the market. I think he can step forward from this. I don't think there'll be the same margin between them this time. William Buick taking over is certainly no bad thing. Not that you would knock James Doyle in the slightest. And so against the favourite, I just thought he was entitled to be much closer this time.
Yeah, he's a horse that, if you go back through his form, only a half a length off Pile Driver in the Churchill Stakes last year. He was sent over to Meydan. Yes, he ran a bit of a shocker in the Dubai in the Dubai turf, but they clearly feel like he warrants a go in these big races, and he as I said, he clearly has the ability. It's just whether Algiers is just an improver, which for me, it looks like he is, whereas Harrovian, we sort of know his level. Interested to get Tom's thoughts on Making Me Do It, where clearly this is a filly, Tom, who the hold-up tactics has definitely suited her. I'm really intrigued, as you are the old weatherman, the specialist, about your point about where you want to be positioned at Lingfield and the fact that she was able to do that. Will this cold weather make it harder for her on this, if they're going to opt in these tactics again? Because she was so good. And I've seen Lingfield yesterday. I've been watching a lot of it at the moment, and I've seen horses coming off the pace, but really being held up. Is there a fine line between where you need to be?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, this is a small field, just 6 runners. Last time out, there was a big field. They went hard early, and she kind of had the perfect toe into the race. She switched to the inside, saved ground. As I say, you don't want to be there, but at the same time, she got a nice clear run. Didn't have to go 6 or 7 wide as the horses all went a breadth coming around the final bend. So she did get the perfect ride, saved ground, kept momentum. But it was really impressive. Her main asset is a turn of foot, which is good in a race with a small field because, you know, they're not likely to go hard early. They're likely to accelerate off coming down that hill, coming into the home bend. But at the same time, this is a huge step up in grade for her. I mean, she won a 0 to 105. Now she's tackling horses who Algiers rated 110, for example, and is capable of being better than that. Also, I think she's probably going to be 6th of 6 early on. And to actually gain ground on horses like Algiers and Harrovian, who are rated higher, experienced, you know what you're going to get with those. When they're not going to go super quick early on, I think it's going to leave her with a real tough task. I think she'll run a good race, but I think she'll be 3rd or 4th.
Okay. It's a gamble I'm willing to take. It sounds like it's all against her, but I'm going to side with Making Me Do It, despite that, just because I feel like I read it that Algiers was going to go off quite hard like he did last time, and that might suit her. But I think Hayley Turner will be very well aware that she won't be able to exactly remake what she did last time, and try and be slightly more handy without being completely off of it. I can't see them crawling with Algiers in it. But anyway, Making Me Do It does get an awful lot of weight off them as well, so that is a bonus for her. And we're all going. Well, myself and Ross are going against Algiers for the same reason. I think there could be a little bit of value in others. So Making Me Do It for me. TC has gone for Algiers and Harrovian for Ross, and that's the Quebec Stakes at Lingfield. The feature race in terms of this weekend. Now we've got a bet of the weekend as well. Of course, as I said, there's not a huge amount for us to choose from. Probably quite difficult to find something that we're, as Ross was saying, fully committed to, because it's a different kind of weekend that we're interested in. But TC, I'm sure that there are things that have caught your attention that you've been following throughout this all-weather season. So is there anything that you want to go for from a NAP perspective?
Well, I really wanted to put Algiers in the NAP category. I'll save him for the next best, and you've had my case for him. But the NAP is Obsidian Knight in the 12:05 at Lingfield. Get off the board early, hopefully make a few pennies going towards the Christmas funds in one of the first races at Lingfield on Saturday. There's a lack of pace in this race, which is a slight worry. So I'll start with the negative. However, there are lots of hold-up horses in here, obviously with a lack of pace. But I think Obsidian Knight is going to be less disadvantaged and inconvenienced by the lack of pace than other horses in the race. I think Baron Boyne will probably go off favourite here, and he needs a fast gallop early on because he's got such a high cruising speed. So I think Obsidian Knight has the edge over Baron Boyne. Obsidian Knight's only had 10 starts, remains completely lightly raced. And in his 10 starts, he had 4 of those runs at Lingfield, and he's won 2 of them. He won a novice race early in the season and then won a handicap a couple of months ago at this track. He has a high cruising speed as well, but he also boasts a really good turn of foot, which is crucial if they don't go hard early, because he's the one that can quicken off the speed and get up with the leaders. When he won that handicap, he was, again, off the pace. I think it was 3 or 4 horses back from the leader, but he slingshot right around the outside. He was 6 wide coming into the straight and one under hands and heels really cosily. Thought last time out at Wolverhampton, he ran a similarly good race. He finished second to a horse called Queen of Ipanema, who is also trained by George Bowie, much like Mr. Cut, as we talked about earlier. And Queen of Ipanema runs in the Winter Oaks trial at 3 o'clock at Lingfield. Much better race. So, we'll see how that form pans out. But in a few strides, Obsidian Knight would have beaten Queen of Ipanema that day. And that race wasn't run to suit. As I've touched on, the only negative is the lack of speed. But I think the booking of William Buick will definitely help. The inside draw will help because Obsidian Knight will cover the least amount of ground. And I think he has the capabilities to win off just £1 higher in 12.05 at Lingfield.
Okay, very good case for Obsidian Knight. Say William Buick, who's got a good book of rides, champion jockey, present at Lingfield on Saturday. Obsidian Knight has got 8-12 and form ties in with Queen of Ipanema. Do you have an next best for us?
The next best is unfortunately Algiers. You've heard my case for him, but the other horse I was tempted to put in the next best category was Pablo Prince in the 225. I won't make a case because he's not my next best. Algiers is, but just look out for that horse. I think he'll be around 4 or 5 to 1, and if they go hard in that race, then I think Rab Havlin's mount can run really well.
Okay, I'm going to mention Queen of Ipanema again. You touched on her. As you say, she's running in the Winter Oaks trial. This is George Bowie's little Highfield princess, if you could even try and start comparing. She began life off a mark of 52. She's now rated 83, and she's gone up that amount in the space of literally 2-3 months. It's an extraordinary run of form that she's gone on. And I think that George Bowie is just brilliant at getting horses to back up their races. He's unbelievable at race planning and finding these gaps for his horses. And he's got this filly on such a good roll. She is up another £3. This is a harder race. A lot of these fillies are coming into this in really good form, which is great. It's a cracking race. But I just think that Queen of Ipanema could still be slightly on the right side. We don't really know what her ceiling is. Got William Buick back on again. And as you say, Obsidian Knight, if TC thinks that horse has got a good chance, then all should bode well for this one. So Queen of Ipanema for me. And then there's one other that I'm going to put up, and that's only because I've been given it as a horse to follow by a certain trainer in Ed Walker. And he really does like his Australia colt, Wapero, who's running in the novice stakes at 12.40. Now, this looks like another good race. We've actually got a runner in Roman Art, but he might be one for handicaps. So I wouldn't worry about him. But it looks like a tough race. But Wapero is clearly one that they really like. And I think I'll be interested to see how he gets on. So those are enough selections, I feel, for Lingfield. Ross, we've come to you next. You might have one, you might have an extra, or you might have something else for us.
Yeah, here's words I never thought I'd say, Jess. I'm going to Chelmsford for my nap. And looking at the 345, which is the maiden, through the summer, I like looking at maidens, and I think racecourse experience shouldn't be underestimated. It's the same actually with juvenile hurdles in the winter. There's a horse in here, Robert Cowell, trained Bluff. Now, he is taking on two very nicely bred opponents in Bravura from Sir Mark Prescott, who's a half to Coronet, and Midas Touch, as well as a Kingman newcomer from Simon Ed Crispus, Bahil, who could be anything. So you are open to bumping into a potential top notcher. But I thought Bluff didn't make a bad job on his debut last time. Was very slowly away from the stalls, got buffeted back, and it was in a race where at Chelmsford, where the winner and the runner-up were first and second for the entirety of the race. They got things absolutely their own way, slipped the field. Bluff had to come very wide down the straight, looked to be hanging back in towards the rail, but stayed on quite nicely to finish third. The horse in second, Clipsham La Habana, has already been given a mark of 82. So that's not a bad level that Bluff has got to. It's just a length behind. I think taking a step forward for that experience sets a pretty decent benchmark for these newcomers to go at. Kevin Stott is on board. He's going along at Great Guns on the all-weather, 20%. I think he's having a proper crack at the all-weather title with girlfriend Megan doing the booking of the rides. I just thought against two newcomers who might take up some of the market, I thought Bluff was by no means about number.
Okay, yeah, quite eye-catching, that jockey booking, isn't it? He was actually on board the first time for Robert Cowell, who's had a quiet enough year in general, hasn't he? So I think the ones that have been running well, at least showing a lot, are ones to follow. So intriguing that, Bluff at Chelmsford. Now, we've gone through what we can of our all-weather, and I think that I'd like to hope that we've got given it a good go. But obviously we do and we will be thinking a lot about National Hunt Racing, and hopefully it will be on sooner than later. It looks like the temperatures are going to go back to relatively normal next week, so we can start again. So we thought it might be a nice opportunity to also delve into some horses that we were really looking forward to seeing over the Christmas period, horses that potentially as well that we hadn't really thought about earlier on in the season, but are really have really caught our imagination and have Christmas as a good target. And I know, Ross, there are definitely a couple that you're really looking forward to that you want to mention.
Yes, the first one is a Dan Skelton trained novice chaser, Lacta Constance, who I actually put up anti-post for one of the novice herds at Cheltenham last year, and he never went to Cheltenham. It transpires he won't be going anywhere near Cheltenham this March either, but he made a really taking novice chase debut at Kempton. Absolutely kicked aside Hudson de Grugy and Samarive, who didn't jump well, so perhaps put a line through him, but he was foot perfect. Dan Skelton has a former eventing colleague of mine, Chris King, employed full-time down there, just jumping all the young horses. They take the jumping very seriously. Chris would do a very, very good job. And this horse was absolutely the epitome of what they do. He never missed a beat. That was over 2 mile. I have no doubt whatsoever that going up in trip is going to see him to even better light. I like the fact they've set their stall out early. They're not going to go to Cheltenham. So you're not worried about prep runs and all that sort of thing. Wherever this horse goes will be the target. I think he's a really impressive horse. And going into next year as well, he's a horse that must go into your tracker. The second one is a Nicky Henderson hurdler, Immortal, who I just absolutely fell in love with as he cantered down to the start at Sandown. He's just the most gorgeous son of Montmartre. He jumped quite big on his first ever racecourse experience, not been to a point-to-point, not been to a bumper. He jumped quite big at Sandown, but gave Authorised Speed enough for a race. Authorised Speed has got plenty of experience from bumpers, had already had hurdling experience, and is a decent operator. I thought that was a really impressive debut. He's going to come on absolute bundles for that. Just going to the racecourse alone will bring him forward. I think he's a really impressive horse to follow. And then the final point I wanted to make was an angle that I'm sort of investigating, watching in the Ollie Murphy yard. Will Kennedy is a jockey I've always had a lot of time for. I never thought he's got the recognition he deserves. He is as good as anyone, particularly to an obstacle. That's why I really rate him. He's a beautiful rider to a fence. And he's now employed full-time by Ollie Murphy, who's looking to get some consistency amongst his team of riders. And I imagine he'll be doing a lot of schooling on these young horses at home. He rode one the other day at Southwell, Kenner Hope, and he gave it a really educational ride. Took a lot of time getting it positioned in the right place, getting it to settle, jumped beautifully, wasn't given an overly hard time. He's got one more run to go to get a mark. I think if he runs to a similar level next time, he's going to wind up on a mark in the mid to late 90s. He's an 83 rated flat performer who's won a couple of times in France on soft and heavy ground. I think he'll be very interesting as a standalone horse, but I also think it'll be interesting to follow Will Kennedy, Ollie Murphy trained horses, perhaps with Sean Bowen taking over on their first time in handicaps. I think you'll see Will Kennedy doing a lot of education, a lot of educating on these young horses in the races, and I think it's an angle I'm keen to follow.
Okay, really interesting that. I know there's been a few changeovers, hasn't there, at Ollie Murphy's, and Aidan Coleman did play a big part, and he's sort of shifting things around. Although it was interesting, and one horse I'd like to ask about, Chasing Fire, the horse that Aidan Coleman has stayed on. He won at Market Raisin. He's a horse that I'm looking forward to seeing over the Christmas months. His son of Maxios, he absolutely bolted up at Market Raisin, and I just thought it was interesting that Aidan Coleman retained the ride, or at least had some sort of agreement that he would keep the ride on that horse. And I'll be intrigued to see where that ends up. It just made me think about it when you were talking about Ollie Murphy. Lac de Constance got he looks something really special. Thought it was really interesting that Dan Skelton said that he's not the finished article at all, and you feel like they're just going to handle him quite tenderly. I think he needs it to be quite soft. Let's hope that we get some proper, genuine national hunt ground over the next while as well. TC, your horses to follow? Any ones that have caught your eye, or any ones that you had put up that you're pleased to see that they're continuing on a good trajectory?
Well, Brave Man's Game wins to King George. I mean, that's not even up for debate anymore. I know Ross has put up Hitman at a huge price, so I do hope he runs well. But I'm not siding away from Brave Man's Game, who I put up at 9-4. The only horse I'm going to mention here, because I want to save the price on some, Jess. We're still a few months out from Cheltenham, etc. Ross was actually talking about Dan Skelton, a novice chaser who jumped really well, and I was thinking, God, we haven't even confirmed on these, but somehow Ross is going to put up the horse that I'm going to mention. Fortunately, he didn't. He did put up another interesting horse in Lap de Constance. But the horse that I'm going to mention is Ballygriffin Cottage. He's only had 4 runs for Dan Skelton. Last year, progressed into a really good novice hurdler. He only had 3 starts last season. Finished 4th in the Albert Bartlett at the Cheltenham Festival behind the Nice Guy. A good effort, but he was always going to be a future chaser. A horse would improve for fences. He's run once this year, came out in a novice chase. Only 3 runners in the field. Keldestan, rated 143. Beauport, rated 148, and Ballygriffin Cottage. Ballygriffin Cottage jumped like an absolute buck. He kicked clear off the home bend and beat Beauport by 11 lengths with absolute ease. This horse could be well capable of performing in Grade 1 companies sooner rather than later. I think he's entered in the, well, he's not entered, but he's in the market for the National Hunt Chase. I think he's around 14-1. I don't know if that'll be the route. Obviously, that's a big step up in trip from what he competed over last time. But if it is, I'd definitely be of interest. He would definitely be of interest. Ballygriffin Cottage.
Okay, Ballygriffin Cottage, great insight there, and thought around that horse as well. Have to say also, Ross, I did have a good look back at your jumpers, some of your jumpers to follow. Il Était Temps and Knowsley Road, both now winners this season. So there are a couple there that we got to keep following, put up by you on our Jumps preview podcast. So that's always worth revisiting for anyone that needs something to go back over now that there is a lack of racing from a Jumps perspective. I'm going to put up one horse that earlier on in the season I didn't know much about, but I'm under good authority that he's one for us to follow. And that's a horse called Quai de Paris from Willie Mullins' yard. He's the son of Master Marvel. He was due to run on the 1st of December at Thurles, but he was a reserve and he didn't get in. So you obviously feel like they're ready for him to run, and he'll run over the Christmas period. He's already ended up in the Future Champions novice hurdle at Leopardstown on the 27th of December. He's a 33-1 shot for the Supreme and a 20-1 shot for the Ballymore Novices Hurdle. He's in the colours of the Richies, so he's clearly a horse that they like. And yeah, as I said, I'm under good authority that he's one for us to follow. So that's one for the tracker. And I think we've gone through quite enough. We've got a good load of jumpers and all-weather horses for us for over this weekend. But before we go, it leaves me with great pleasure, because it is your all-weather podcast special, Tom, for your stat attack.
Sure, yeah, stat attack this week. Unfortunately, it contains a horse that's going to be odds on, but hopefully a winner. Roger Varian is 24% with his 3-year-olds on the all-weather this season. He's had 29 winners from 119 runners, as well as 36 further places. So over 50% basically in the top 3. Phenomenal record and a good sample size. If you had £1 on every single one of those runners, you'd have a profit of £16.48. £10 on each runner, profit of £164.80. So a good profit as well. His sole representative on Saturday is Lord Paramount, who runs in handicap company for the first time in the 240 at Chelmsford. Cameron Noble takes the ride. I think he's probably too good for his elders in that race. Hopefully an odds-on banker for you guys if you like your ACCAs, or even if you just want to play a single.
Okay, brilliant. Well, Roger Varian, another man to follow. Before we go, I know that there are plenty of other ways that we can get involved in the SBK content. A reminder that we obviously have the World Cup final on Sunday, and it's another opportunity to listen into the SBK World Cup podcast with Gary Pallister and Lee Sharp. But also, TC, this must be a great time of year for you, because you've got the NFL as well, the NFL podcast that you record with Nat Coombs. Okay, that's all that we have time for this week. A reminder that new SBK customers can get £30 in free bets by betting £10. T's and C's always apply. Please remember to subscribe. We are committed, despite what the weather is going to tell us, to give you a podcast every week for some good quality racing action, and let's hope that we've given you something to think about for the all-weather for this weekend. But let's also hope we'll be back with National Hunt Racing next week. We'll have a Christmas special, which will have plenty for us to get through. Obviously, we've got great racing over here, but also in Ireland as well. But I hope that you can continue on subscribing and liking, and don't forget, as we've mentioned, the SBK ambassador content and exclusive stable tours are on the SBK Hub on the YouTube channel as well. Thanks again, as always, to Ross and to Tom, and we'll see you next week.